Today, we take a short trip to our beautiful city, Toronto, where we meet and greet one of its illustrious sons, Dr. Leonard Edwards, a Toronto clinical social worker, therapist, and educator who spent over a decade working at CAMH and in private practice. His clients include men dealing with addiction, homelessness, depression, anxiety, relationship breakdown, and family court stress. We'll talk shutdown, anger, addiction, access to care, and what real self care looks like. But before starting this fascinating discussion, here's some information about our organization. First of all, I'm Dipchand Ramcharitar, Outreach and Development Director at Voice of Men 360. We're based in London, Ontario, Canada. Our organization centers around supporting and advocating for men and boys, though we do reach out to other demographics, such as the Indigenous community, as well as organizations that are women oriented. We are part of International Men's Day, who operate in a similar capacity worldwide. Here's our disclaimer. We would like to remind everyone that Voice of Men 360's mission is always delivered in good faith with the intent of peaceful harmony for all. The views and opinions shared by the participants are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of Voice of Men 360. Please note that our content is not a substitute for professional, medical, or therapeutic advice. If you're struggling with personal challenges, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a qualified expert. For questions or concerns about today's episode or any of our content, feel free to email us at info@voiceofmen360.org. And of course, with me today is our ever so hardworking president, Sivam Vilautam, who's behind the scenes handling the technical stuff. This is our 224th episode of OpenUp, a live talk show simulcasted on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, where we engage with knowledgeable, influential guests on stories having a direct and significant impact on our communities at large, especially men and boys. And now it's a pleasure to warmly welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Leo Edwards. And before I actually bring Dr. Edwards on, I would like to draw a point here that this is a reminder to everyone to please visit the Health Ministry's website and have your say by completing the questionnaire by the deadline date of June 1st, 2026. This website is the Ministry of Health website, where you can go on and have your say regarding the Ministry of Health recent launch to have aimed at improving the lives of men and boys across the nation. So, Dr. Edwards, first of all, can you introduce yourself, give us some background, and before going further than that, can you tell us why you think it's important that the government has launched this website to improve the lives of men and boys? Leo, as we want to call you on today's episode.
Thank you so much. So, as way of introduction, I'm from the beautiful island of Grenada, and I've been here in Canada for almost 20 years. I'm a social worker, a psychotherapist, educator, and an equity consultant. I work in a senior leadership role at CAMH in health equity and mental health. When I'm not at CAMH, I'm teaching part-time at a community college. I teach in social work and mental health. And in my private practice, I work primarily with Black men, racialized communities who are dealing with trauma, anxiety, depression, and identity issues. I'm inspired by seeing how stigma prevents men from seeking support. And so a passion of combining clinical therapy, social justice, and community healing, and certainly cultural responsive mental health is what really brought me into this work. I am really what I'm interested in is seeing people feel human again, not just being symptom free. And so recognizing that many men across our globe, certainly here in Canada as well, are taught survival and not a lot of emotional literacy. So I'll get a bit into that later. And so the goal really is to create a space where men can again feel free, be human, and just really connect with themselves. In regards to the Ontario strategies for boys and men, I think it's important. I think it is long overdue. Many boys, many men are struggling silently with mental health, with addiction, with isolation, and the stigma around asking for help. I think this strategy is positive as perhaps we'll see more attention being placed on prevention, maybe more attention be placed on emotional wellness and support for men before they reach the point of crisis. I think it's also an important strategy, uh, including the cultural responsiveness section of it, that will be important to support racialized and immigrant men, because the experiences of racialized and immigrant men is a bit different. I think it is often shaped by stigma, it is often shaped by racism, and certainly by systemic barriers. So that I think is a really important initiative. I think at times strategies though are not enough. I think what we need across Ontario is real investment in accessible mental health, real investment in social in addiction support and mentorship, and certainly overall community programs. So overall, I see this as the first step, but the impact I think will depend on whether men and boys actually feel more supported in their everyday lives.
Absolutely, I join you in that. The way you've got that message across. It's important for everyone to get involved in having their say on that website. Sivam had just the website flashed across the screen a second ago. So here it is again. So it's important, and as Leo mentioned, there are unique situations within that particular drive, in that there are marginalized groups out there that need specific attention or attention in unique ways. And he, of course, have had that experience, and he is going to later on share some of that with us. So thanks for that important piece of advice, Leo. Now, when it comes to you've talked about men embracing their mess wholeheartedly. I mean, we're all part and parcel of that in society. We screw up from time to time, and sometimes it's a question of rising up from the ashes and getting yourself back on your feet. And sometimes instead of resigning yourself, which I think is a easier thing to do, but obviously not the better thing to do. And so, in your particular situation, you have certain solutions that can help men improve themselves in this regard. So you've talked about helping people embrace their mess wholeheartedly and build manageable plans. For a client who's dealing with addiction, job loss, and a custody battle all at once, what does embracing the mess look like in the first session?
Thank you. That's a really important question. And I think there's a lot of misconception and understanding about seeking help, about therapy, etc. The first session is not about fixing anything. The first session really is about stabilization. It is about creating a space for emotional safety. I think anyone that's facing addiction, that's facing job loss and custody, simultaneously will struggle because of those experiences. And so embracing the mess in that context and within therapy means really one, acknowledging reality, honestly, that I'm facing job loss here, that I'm dealing with an addiction issue. And then the second is to reduce shame. And third, to stop the self punishment that people take on when they're going through those difficult situations. So the first session in therapy is one, at least from my perspective, is to help our clients, to help the person understand the problem, to really understand as well the emotional pain that comes with that experience, and then figuring out collectively short-term and long-term goals. Within that session, the first and perhaps the second, it is about prioritizing survival. It is about prioritizing safety. Things like, are you able to sleep? Do you feel safe? Do you feel some sort of emotional regulation? I think what feels like it's drowning for most today is often they use steps that aren't helpful. And so within the first session is about really emphasizing progress over perfection. I have this mantra that I live by. It is never about perfection, but it is always about progression. So within those first sessions, it is to really provide a space where men can arrive believing that they can do things that they mean to, and that providing the space for them to have that realization, I think, is important to build dignity before we even get to this place of motivation, to address and to work through whatever challenges they're experiencing.
Absolutely. How do you handle it when the client says to you, "Hey, buddy, my life's gone too far gone. What can I do now?"
Mm-hmm.
Or
So,
resigned tone.
mm-hmm. So I think it's to remind them that each of us, including myself as a therapist, would face struggles in life, will face situations that are hard to bear, and that what we're really doing is building a house brick by brick. You don't have to have the full solid structure, but you can do things in your life that are small, that are meaningful, that brings you joy, that brings you a sense of safety. And when you build those brick by brick by brick, you're laying a foundation to get back to the place where you were, or perhaps even to surpass where you were before. So it's really about giving them the opportunity to believe that, and to engage with it in a way maybe that would be slow. Robots not built in a day. It doesn't have to happen quickly. It can certainly be a slow but meaningful journey.
Yeah, speaking of that brick analogy, I remember looking at a video on Buddhism, and um, he was talking about, if men, if you build a brick with a build a wall, sorry, with 1,000 brick, and two is slightly out of alignment, most people would focus on those two instead of the 998 that are perfectly aligned. So that's something that I guess it's human nature. You're not looking at the positives, which sometimes outweigh the negatives. But human nature being what it is, that's how we end up, on that path. And it takes, again, somebody like yourself to show them the light and make them realize, like, hey, you've achieved, even though it may not seem that way. And for those who haven't, and you're there to give them that push in that direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the things that men do very well, which is not a positive, is shutting down. Many men shut down emotionally in relationships and friendships when stress hits, especially. From your therapy room, what does that shutdown actually look like for men dealing with depression or substance abuse?
No, that's a really good question. And I think it moves beyond men just in therapy, but people generally. Many of us don't have language for the emotions that we experience. We have what's called primary emotion, so anger, sadness, and things of that sort. And
Right.
we're able to name those in ways that are more easy. But also there's what's called secondary emotion and tertiary emotion. As it relates to emotional shutdown in men, it doesn't often look like sadness. What it can look like, at least from my experience as a therapist, it can show up as irritability. It can show up as silence, certainly emotional numbness, as well withdrawal and overworking, substance use, whether it is marijuana, whether it is alcohol, whether it's whatever substance of people's choice. And as
Right.
well, increased anger could show up. And so I think this is connected to how we are socialized as men. We're generally socialized to disconnect from vulnerability. Because if you're vulnerable, it can come across as you are a weak man. And so we're socialized to disconnect. And so the depression in men would often appear as frustration, as exhaustion, as emotional detachment, and things of that sort. There are though early signs that we can look for to tell whether a person in this context, men, are experiencing emotional withdrawal, depression, or anxiety. And those can be things like loss of interest in hobbies. Perhaps you enjoyed playing cricket and football and basketball, and there is no interest in that anymore. It can also show up as isolation from friends and families, as avoiding difficult conversation. As well, it can show up physiologically around sleep. Your sleep pattern can change and things of that sort. And so many men may feel exhaustion externally while internally they are collapsing. And some men has expressed to me the only emotion that they feel they can express really is anger because the anger feels accessible. So emotional shutdown, I think, for men and for people generally, can show up as a protective strategy, and it's not the lack of caring. And I think that's really important to keep in mind that men are seeking help, but the way we're socialized is that it's difficult to do so.
Right. And now there comes a time where you have to sort of differentiate between how can you tell the difference between an actual shutdown or look, he just doesn't care?
I think you have to sort of, it will be contextual for each person. You have to know what the person's baseline presentation is, as well as you have to pay attention to duration and intensity. All of us have days where we feel upset or down or sad, and that's acceptable because we are humans. Much like the weather changes, you look at the sky, snow will fall from the sky, sometimes rain, sometimes snow, sometimes hail, but the sky still stays the same. And
Yep.
same with us as human, we have a range of emotions. Some are pleasant, some are unpleasant, and we have to leave and give space for those experiences. But when it gets to a place where it is incredibly intense and it's going on for a longer period than it would at baseline, then we know there's a problem.
Right. And for families, what would you tell families not to do when a man goes quiet?
What I'll tell them certainly not to do is to shame or blame or, in a way, forcefully show that frustration. I'm frustrated that you're quiet. You
Right.
have to really engage with from a place of cultural, from humility, recognizing that okay, this person is dealing with some challenges, and really just show up as a friend. Just really listen. You don't have to editorialize. You don't have to add context. Just provide a space for a man, for a boy to be without feeling like you have to change that. You can certainly provide supports and resources, but what you certainly shouldn't do is shame and blame and force a conversation. Those aren't helpful.
Yeah, and it unfortunately tends to be a pattern that some families take on. Yeah, and people try to make it about them as opposed to the person who's actually going through the distress, and that's a big no-no. But it comes in handy when you can get that message across, as you just said, to
Yeah,
those families.
yeah, I think, and culturally as well, many of us are coming from cultures that are very collectivist in nature.
Right.
Your identity is wrapped up in your family's identity. And so, because of that real communal cultural piece, you would find racialized men, their extended families may be heavily involved and heavily forceful because there is a more collective identity as opposed to the West, where it's much more individualized. People are given much more space and breath to just go through whatever they're going through.
Right. And following up a bit more on that, when it comes to substance abuse and family separation, They often sort of feed into each other. In your work at CAMH and in your private practice as well, what pattern do you see between addiction relapse and loss of access to kids by fathers?
That's a real important question, and I think a very heavy one as well. Certainly, there's a strong clinical relationship between addiction and family separation, where you can lose access to a child, and that can certainly intensify depression. That can, for sure, trigger a sense of hopelessness, perhaps as well increase relapse risk. And so shame can be as well a major relapse trigger for people who are experiencing addiction concerns. And so a father may internalize, if they've lost their child, etc., I'm a failure. My kids perhaps are better off without me. And when CAS, which Child Protective Services, and the court becomes involved, that can create even more stress and fear for a man. And so, given those variables, recovery then can become harder when the identity as a man, as a father, feels certainly threatened. And so, I think it's important, therefore, to help fathers separate the behavior of substance use from identity, as well as rebuild, to my earlier point, slowly but as well consistently. And I think to do that, then you would need to focus on accountability. You would need to focus on emotional regulation. That is being able to identify what you're feeling, verbalize what you're feeling, and then importantly think about ways to address those. I
Right.
think you would need to focus on stability and perhaps routines that are more healthy. And so essentially, I think would be important to encourage men to see recovery as healing, perhaps relational healing, and
Yeah.
not just being sober. And so I think to get to that place is it would be important to rebuild trust, um, especially when there's emotional pain.
That's for sure. I may be putting you on the spot here by asking you this. What do you think is the biggest mistake family courts make with parents in recovery?
Um, I think from my experience, one of the biggest challenges is that many of our systems aren't speaking to each other. And it's coming from a place that's incredibly punitive as opposed to restorative. And I
Right.
think that is from Western, what's called epistemology, like Western understandings, right?
Good
And
point.
so, yeah, and so because the court are very siloed, and it's coming from that punitive place, it can seem as punishment, and that can certainly is certainly not helpful around recovery. I think rehabilitation is perhaps more important. I think if all of our systems, the school, the courts, the hospital, the education, if all those systems are speaking and are around the table, sort of thinking about how indigenous people do their justice,
Yeah.
everybody's talking, a circle around the person, that I think is would be more helpful. But the West, especially when the court is involved, incredibly punitive, and many of us already are showing up in those spaces from a place of deficit, because these systems inherently can be exclusionary, can be built on racism and on Western epistemologies, and so certainly that can get in the way of recovery and family support.
Yeah, the holistic approach. I mean, there's nothing better than that. If all facets involved get together and are on the same page, obviously, there are going to be differences creeping in. But overall, I think, as you mentioned, we don't need to get punitive. We need to have solutions that make sense to everybody, especially when one is down and out for the count. So this is very important. How do you work with a client who's using to cope with grief over the children?
Hmm. I think recognizing that grief goes through stages. And so it's about, again, providing a space for that conversation and providing supports that are culturally responsive for that grief. Um, Grief isn't just about the loss of a life. People go through bereavement, and certainly that is true. But when it relates to supporting families, it's about providing the support informally as well. It doesn't always have to be a therapist. It can be a family friend, a community member that you feel some sort of safety with, and engaging in conversation. Talk is incredibly helpful around healing. And so, if there's opportunities for people to share without judgment and shame, that, in my opinion, is the first step to that recovery, to dealing with
Yeah,
that grief.
that's for sure. We all need to be cognizant rather of that fact, and work towards that as a potential solution, because it's like chaos out there, and we need some sort of order, some sort of system in which we should operate when we're dealing with situations like this. Now, I know you're very big on self-care, and that's something that's missing in a big part of society. It's quick to just recommend some pills or something of that sort, which there are obvious situations where those are necessary. But I think self care really gets a sort of it's underrated, as far as helping people get ahead when they fall into the doldrums of mental pain, mental stress, and all these things. So for clients that are actively dealing with depression, anxiety, trauma, while facing things like family court, unemployment, and addiction, what does realistic self-care actually look like?
That's a really good question, and thanks for asking that.
Sure.
One of the mantras that I live by and I share with my clients all the time is a quote by Audre Lorde, who is perhaps the most prolific writer that I've ever come across. And Audre Lorde, in her work, noted that self care is not about self indulgence, it is about self preservation, and that in itself, she noted, is what is political. And so self care, I think, is often misunderstood as luxury or as relaxation. Many of our men and family don't have the opportunity to engage in luxury and travel and spa and all of those. And
Right.
so I think it's important that we put this in context. For men in crisis, realistic self-care can simply mean eating consistently. It can mean attending your appointments that you have set. It can mean getting sleep, reducing isolation, so going around families and friends. It can mean as well, if that's a person's goal, staying sober. So the focus of self-care should always be on functional coping. And by that I mean building routines where the person is not only surviving, but that they're able to thrive. And so, some simple things that men can do that's realistic, if they feel a sense of isolation and disconnection, take your cell phone up, text a person, a safe person that you want to talk to. It can mean doing a grounding exercise. There are tons of them online on YouTube where you put it and you just do a 5-10 minute grounded meditation piece.
Right.
It can mean as well listening to music. During COVID, it was a hard time for many of us, including myself. And what was helpful for me during COVID was listening to music and dance. And not just any music. I'm from Grenada. Soca is what we like. So playing soca and moving my body and those things were really helpful in increasing my mood and energy and all of those things. And so I think we have to create the space, and it has to be a safe space where we can encourage men to redefine what self care is, redefine what being strong and what strength is, by asking for help, by resting when there is a need to do so, by being honest, and certainly, and perhaps most difficultly, by being vulnerable. I say all the time, community is medicine. It's not always about the psychotherapy and pharmacological intervention. It's about building community. Community is medicine. Community connection can be certainly a protective factor, especially again for men who are racialized. And the healing that we engage in must fit our real life. It will look different for each of us who are on this call. And so I think that's important.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm from Trinidad, so I'll go with you on the soca thing. We
Hmm.
made,
Hmm.
uh, now, now this is something that as men, from the dawn of civilization to today, I don't think this has changed. Any men are considered, and for good reason, the providers and protectors of a society. How do you address um, a man who feels guilty about spending time or money on himself?
Hmm. I think that man perhaps should take a pause to reflect that again, sometimes we have to be selfish, and we have families, we may have a partner, certainly children, and you have to certainly meet your responsibilities. But it is 100% okay to step away from folks who are leaning into you and that are needing your support to think about yourself. When you are on a plane, and you perhaps heard this analogy before, they'll say to you, if we go through if there's an accident or whatever, you have to put on your mask first before you put it on the person, including your child who you might be traveling with. So take the time you need for yourself, gas yourself up, drink your water, spend your money on you, not neglecting your responsibilities, but intentionally focusing on what you need to sustain, what you need to grow and to be a better father, a better brother, a better uncle, etc.
Yeah, it's about time we take that time for ourselves to acknowledge who we are. And while we acknowledge, and I guess none of us is going to shy away from our responsibilities towards society, our family, and community, and everything else. As you mentioned, when that mass drops down 39,000 feet in the air, when there's a lack of oxygen, you don't push the mask on the child's face first, it's on yours.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's a perfect analogy for, as a man, how you should view life. Look after yourself in the best possible way before you can look after anybody else. And for those who think that's selfish, well, that's on them, not on you.
Absolutely. If you're broken, you if your hand's broken, you're gonna put it into a cast and take care of that until you get your mobility back, so you can use your hand. And the same is true for our emotions.
Rightfully so. And I want to touch now on something that I think this is something you deal more in your private practice, and that's research shows that men from the Caribbean, East and West African backgrounds in Ontario are more likely to experience serious mental health crisis like losing touch with reality. More broadly, how do you help clients who are dealing with both addiction and major mental health issues at the same time?
That's a real timely question, being from Grenada and understanding the stigma, the cultural stigma around mental illness. And I think it remains significant in many of our East and West African and Caribbean communities. Many families interpret mental health and addiction symptoms through spirituality, perhaps it's a demon, obia, all of those things. It is also understood through morality and discipline and shame. And so, because of those underpinnings, many men will delay seeking support, even in crisis stage. And so, the importance of cultural responsive care then is important, especially in the context of North America, where we will need to provide an avenue and space again for trust building, where we must understand the stress that's connected to migration and perhaps displacement. Certainly, racism have a role to play, and masculinity expectation across our communities and families. And so, I think what's needed for Caribbean East and West African men is integrated support. It's about psychiatry and pharmacological, but as well therapy. It's about housing. It's about family support. It is about the church as well being involved. And so I think it's important then that we educate our families that mental illness and addiction challenges are not weaknesses, and really encourage our families to avoid blame, and to stay connected, recognizing as well the early signs that their boy and men might be showing up with, and a reminder that healing can improve, especially from our communities that are collectivist in nature. Certainly can improve when there is community, and when there is family involvement in a way that is supportive. And so many men perhaps will open up if they feel culturally understood.
Right. We do have a question from a viewer, and that question is there a role for spirituality and or prayer as a coping mechanism?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, that's my brother, actually. Spiritual spirituality can play a major role in emotional healing, and self care. I think, especially around stress and grief, and with in addiction recovery and other life transitions. For
Right.
many people, spirituality, whatever the faith is, provides meaning. It can provide hope, maybe grounding as well, and a connection to a higher power. And I think that can give a person some kind of inner peace. And so it can perhaps help people feel less alone during those difficult periods. Um, and I think that's important. Spirituality, though, doesn't always mean religion. Spirituality can mean as well prayer, it can mean meditation. Spirituality certainly can mean mindfulness and other cultural practices. It can also mean nature, engaging with nature and reflection. And so in therapy, spirituality can become a protective factor. And in fact, with many of the clients that I support, if faith and spirituality is a strong part of their identity, that is often weaved in as support to support their resilience. And so for many men, uh, spirituality can become, to my earlier point, um, spirituality can create a space for that vulnerability, a space for accountability, for forgiveness and healing. And so it is a practice that is often encouraged if it can help a man and a person feel centered, feel calm, and connected to something that's bigger than themselves.
Absolutely. It again, it's the holistic approach. There's no one size fits all sort of situation. You mix medicine with therapy and whatnot. It's a whole sort of a adds all to the ball game. So we all need to be cognizant of the fact that we have different facets to look into as far as healing is concerned. And um, I have a little fun session here for you. It's like one word responses. So, what's the first word that comes to mind in the following situation? So, number one, what do men in crisis need most from a therapist in session one?
Safety,
Safety. Yeah, that makes sense. What's the biggest misconception people have about anger in men?
strength,
Good, yeah, that's true. What stops a man from asking for help until it's a crisis?
hmm, shame,
Shame and guilt. I think that's you're right. Absolutely. Now, if a father has been cut off from his kids, the first emotion under the surface is
grief.
grief. Yep, you got that. And finally, what should an organization like ours, Voice of Men 360, focus on next to help men heal?
Healing.
Healing. Yeah,
Hmm.
I think we should all pay attention to that. So, uh, it's something I would share with my colleagues at Voice Men 360. It's something we already do, but just for, I guess, reassurance sort of thing. So we're almost to the end. I have a final question for you, but before we wrap up, I'd like to give out some further information about our organization. Our phone number is 226-289-8784. We're at website wise, www.voicemen360.org. And our email address is info@voicemen360.org. And also, we're pretty much on all social media platforms, including YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Please visit our Facebook group page as well as YouTube. We encourage your participation through comments, suggestions, membership inquiries, etc., regardless of ethnicity, status, location. Remember, we're actively online all the time. Whatever your financial situation, it doesn't matter what gender you are. And while we're on this topic of gender, we want to emphasize that our goal as an organization is to improve the lives of men and boys, by extension, our community. We do this keeping in mind that we're not here to minimize or marginalize any progress that has been attempted on behalf of women and girls. So, Leo, for the final discussion that we're having here today, just give us, for those interested in learning more about your work, can you share your contact information?
Sure. Before I do that, maybe a closing comment. I want all the men who are listening to know that struggling does not make you weak. Struggling really makes you human, and that it's important that healing start by beginning to have honest conversation that allows yourself to ask for help. I also want families and communities to understand that compassion, that listening, and emotional connection can be important and can truly change people's life. If you like to follow me on social media, you can on Instagram at dr.leo with two O's. And if you want to reach me by email, my email address is leo.edwards@me.com.
Okay, well, thank you ever so much, Leo, for this really inspiring and enlightening session. It was real, practical, and hopeful, exactly what our listeners need. Thanks again for being a special part of this podcast. To all the dads out there and men listening, you don't have to clean up the mess alone. As Leo says, help exists, and you can embrace the mess and still build something purposeful. Thanks to everyone who tuned into the podcast. We absolutely appreciate your time. A huge thanks also to our esteemed president, Sivam Valautam, for keeping the technical side flowing smoothly. We would like to emphasize again that our intention here at Voice of Men 360 is to support men and boys in a way that complements, not opposes, progress for women and girls. So from all of us here at Voice of Men 360, keep showing up for yourself and for your family. Stay strong, stay positive. Cheers. Goodbye from all of us here.